How could abortion rights exist where the right to life doesn't? And so if it's not a legal right, it's a natural right. And if it's a natural right, then it means that little women in the womb have a right to abortion, but not a right to life. Welcome to the la la land. And she looked out her window, Olivia, and she said, how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause?
Hello and welcome to WJ Now. I'm Olivia Brown, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Seth Gruber, who is the president of the White Rose Resistance, a pro-life activism organization, and also the host of the Unaborted podcast. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for all that you're doing.
So we know with Roe versus Wade basically changed everything. And in November, we're seeing a lot of ballot initiatives that are going to be in 5 different states. Can you tell me about which states these ballot initiatives are going to be on and give us a little bit more perspective and what they mean for the voters?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting to watch the left lose their mind over the overturning of Roe versus Wade, because what does the left always complain about, Olivia? They always say, this is a threat to our democracy, right? Our democracy is in grave danger. And then when democracy literally reasserts itself, if we want to use it in its historical definition, of the people now have the political right to demand that their legislators craft laws around the abortion issue that reflect their preferences. So now that states can make abortion illegal, or unfortunately, if you're in like Michigan and California, looking to codify abortion through point of birth and write it into the state constitution, regardless, it's the people now that get to handle this issue. And then we're told by the activist media and the abortion industrial complex that this is the greatest threat to freedom and democracy. This was the most repeated ad nauseum phrase after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, was that the overturning of Roe versus Wade was literally the greatest threat to freedom and democracy we've ever seen. So I think the first thing we have to say, and say very clearly, is that when these people say our democracy, they just mean leftism. They just mean their oligarchy. They're not concerned with democracy or a constitutional republic system or a federalist system. They never have been. And so, and of course, because they're pro-abortion, they kill babies through point of birth. Can you think of something more perverted and more focused on the exercise of raw political power? And so I always say, if you don't get the right to life right, you're not going to get any other rights right. So that shouldn't surprise us. But yeah, you have several states now around the country, namely California and Michigan, pushing very hard to codify abortion through point of birth, and several others that will have abortion on the ballot this November, that either it's like trying to ban infanticide, so requiring protections for babies after they're born, because there's never been a federal protection that's actually required that, or some more moderate pieces of legislation. But this is a moment for the pro-life movement and, frankly, the church, in my opinion, to reassert its political influence, to say enough of the baby killing, and we're going to put a stop to this in our communities.
In Kentucky, one of the states where there is a new ballot initiative, 3 Jewish women are now coming forward saying that it will violate their religious rights and that it is bigotry to their faith that they cannot have an abortion. Kentucky has a extremely tight abortion limit. It actually is at fertilization is the abortion ban. And so now they are saying, you are bigots if I cannot get an abortion. Do they really have any legal way that they can do this?
Right. So I'll do you one more there. So last year or earlier this year, the Texas Satanic Temple filed a lawsuit against governor of Texas, his name just slipped my mind, and for their pro-life legislation, and literally
Wow.
argued, just to prove my point, right, about how religious these people are. Let's let them speak for themselves to prove my point. They argued in their lawsuit, Olivia, that abortion is one of their sacraments. It's like, hey, when someone tells you who they are, believe them, okay? And so they said, therefore, that pro-life legislation violated their religious right as the Satanic Temple, right? Peter Kreeft, the Catholic philosopher, put it beautifully when he said, abortion is the demonic parody of the Eucharist. That's why it uses the same holy words. This is my body, but with the opposite blasphemous meaning. So it's not ironic as people of faith to learn that the words of our Savior at the Last Supper, this is my body, I break it for you, take and eat in remembrance of me, is the same phrase that has become the central rallying cry of the pro-abortion secular moral movement for decades. This is my body, my choice. In other words, I'm my own God. You can't just call anything you want a right and expect the state to protect it. There are some things that some religions might consider a right, but if it violates natural law principles and the foundational principles that made this country great, then you don't get that quote unquote right. Notice how the left labels any debauched moral vision and goal that they have, Olivia, as a right. And so where does this right to abortion come from? I think that's really the question I would ask in regards to your question, right? Oh, well, the Jews are saying that they need abortion. That's a religious right. The Satanists are saying they need abortion, that that's a religious right. Where does the right to abortion come from? And this is an interesting question, and I'll finish your question with this answer. This is a very interesting question to ask people who say they're pro-choice, because it causes cognitive dissonance. Something that most pro-aborts don't ever actually entertain or allow themselves to entertain, which is to have their ideas be challenged. So where does the right to abortion come from, Olivia? Is it a legal right? Because if it's a legal right, a right that exists only insofar as the government grants that right, like the right to drive, right, or something like that, then the abortion advocate cannot really complain if the state does not permit her own abortion, because the same government that can grant rights can also take them away. Okay, so then they say, maybe it's not a legal right. They say it's a woman's right. What are they saying? They're saying it's a human right. When you use the language of human rights, you're using the language of natural rights. Okay, so if it's not a legal right, is it a natural right? A right that exists and a right that springs from our human nature as human beings? Because if it's a natural right, then it's a right that abortion advocate had the moment she began to exist, the moment she became a human being, the moment of conception. So we are left with an amusing paradox, to quote Peter Kreeft. According to the logic of abortion advocates, unborn women do not have a right to life, but they do have a right to an abortion, which is ludicrous, obviously, because how could abortion rights exist where the right to life doesn't? And so if it's not a legal right, it's a natural right. And if it's a natural right, then it means that little women in the womb have a right to abortion, but not a right to life. Welcome to the la land of secular progressivism. We have to return to those things that we used to know.
You put out recently a YouTube short which was really making the waves because of the connection between abortion and Nazism. We're going to watch this video, and then I really want to hear where you came up with the idea to put this information out, because so many people don't know about it.
RU 486, that's the abortion pill. It's taken through 10 weeks. You want to know what RU stands for? Roussel Ucloff. That's what the RU stands for, okay? Roussel Ucloff, majority shareholder, is named Hoechst AG, okay? Hoechst AG emerged from the breakup of the German chemical company known as IG Farben. IG Farben is infamous for creating a gas known as Zyklon B, the cyanide gas used to poison Jews in German concentration camps. So Hoechst AG simply shifted from creating poison to kill Jews to creating poison to kill babies. There's a 45-second vignette, and I can dive into Sanger later if you'd like, regarding some of the eugenic legacy of the abortion industry.
That is absolutely chilling. What is this deeper connection between Nazism, eugenics, and the abortion movement?
Yeah, we could be here for an hour, Olivia. My good friend Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA Faith are currently sponsoring and promoting my nationwide church tour, the White Rose Resistance National Life Tour. We're finishing up our 9th church in November at Calvary Chapel Chino Hills in Southern California, and we'll probably do another tour in the new year. And what I'm doing on that tour is I am explaining the links between the eugenics movement, the population bomb, right, or the population council. There's too many people on Earth, right? Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, the Obamas, all of them are obsessed with this idea that there's just too many people. The Nazis, the KKK, Margaret Sanger, all of these people have all been on the same team. It's something very important for the pro-life movement and the church to understand. These are not different movements, okay? These were not different political visions. All of these people were on the same team. Reel you just played of me, that's just one window into that, right? That Hooks AG, that emerged from the breakup of the German chemical company known as IG Farben, who then later rolled out their company Roussel Uclof, the same company that created the gas to kill Jews, created the poison to kill babies through the abortion pill. That's just one of many links. Here's one. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, when it was still called the American Birth Control League, had a man on her board of directors, Olivia, and his name was Lothrop Stoddard. Lothrop Stoddard was a high official of the Massachusetts Ku Klux Klan. Okay. Lothrop Stoddard wrote a book called The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy. Lothrop Stoddard wrote another book called The Rise of the Underman. Oh, who's that? Who's the Underman? Well, he's usually referring to black people and Jews. Well, then Adolf Hitler's chief racial theorist, Alfred Rosenberg, appropriated the German term Untermensch from the English version of Lothrop Stoddard's book, The Rise of the Underman. Untermensch meaning underman in German, or subhuman to refer to the Jews, and the title of Heinrich Himmler's famous Nazi propaganda book, Untermensch. The Nazis, Olivia, got the term Untermensch from the English version of Margaret Sanger's board member's book. Here's one other. Ernst Rudin wrote regularly in Margaret Sanger's Birth Control Review, her publication, where she would write and invite guest writers to share their ideas, usually on eugenics, okay, and the idea that there were too many people on Earth. And Ernst Rudin would write regularly for Margaret Sanger. Ernst Rudin, at the time of writing for Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was none other than Adolf Hitler's director of genetic sterilization, and was one of the architects of sort of the pre-Holocaust race purification programs. Those are just a few more windows into this. You had Hitler, after he got out of jail from his failed coup attempt in Munich, writing fan mail to Madison Grant and Leon Whitney, two of the leaders of the American Eugenics Society, who shared office spaces with Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League and were very good friends and allies. So when you hear people like Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk say, hey, the abortion Planned Parenthood thing, it's kind of a racist, Nazi, Adolf Hitler-like thing. That's not just a Republican talking point used to rile up the base. That is a little bit as to why people say things like that.
That's so shocking, but it's so important to know these things because in schools we're just seeing revisionist history saying, oh no, but they switched parties. The Democrats and the Republicans, no, they've completely changed. No, they have been the same. And that's just atrocious to know that she shared the same business office with them. And you mentioned the White Rose Resistance. Can you tell us a little bit more about that organization? You said that you are visiting churches. Where can people find your content beyond joining that tour?
Yeah, well, my podcast is Unaborted with Seth Gruber because we're all unaborted. And as to quote Reagan, I've noticed everyone who's for abortion has already been born, right? So that's the irony there. We are at about 250 episodes. The podcast is just over 3 years old. Just had Eric Metaxas on, had Sean Foyt. We'll be releasing my Freedom Night in America with Charlie Kirk from last week. We just got back from Maine. And then I'm headed off to Denver tomorrow for October 13th for a Turning Point USA Faith event. So people can connect with the podcast, or they can go to thewhiterose.life, thewhiterose.life, not .com, .life. to check out our organization or the whiterose.life/events to see our national tour. But the White Rose Resistance, Olivia, is based off of the story of an incredible group of 20 somethings, anti Nazi Christian resistance fighters. In 1942 and 1943. Now, when I would say resistance fighters, right, Media Matters tuning into your show, that I'm not, that doesn't mean some type of military Christian army that's going to slaughter all the leftists. Okay, that nobody knows their history anymore. It means to resist evil, to do something about it, to be as focused and committed to defending life and liberty in the public square schools. And so we're telling the stories of Christian resistance fighters in Nazi Germany. And here's the important reason, too. They were facing the same ideology, Olivia, the same ideology that birthed Margaret Sanger, that birthed Planned Parenthood, that birthed the modern eugenics movement, that birthed the American Eugenics Society, who influenced Hitler. Hitler once told a comrade that he attributed much of his Nazi legislation in the Third Reich to the ideas and laws already on the books and being espoused by American eugenicists in America. And so they were facing the same ideology, and they began to distribute and write anti-Nazi leaflets, stay up all night, and take trains around Germany to drop them off in major cities. It was the 1942 version of a social media campaign. Ideas, expose the evil. Look, do you see what's happening? Do something about it. And so Sophie Scholl, a 21-year-old with dreams of becoming a school teacher, with a deep and abiding faith, Olivia, she comes across a leaflet on the ground one time in 1942. She picks it up, she begins to read it, and it's explicitly condemning the crimes of the Nazis and asking the good people to wake up. She understood what Reagan once said, that evil is powerless when the good are unafraid. And so she begins to read this leaflet, and it's not complaining and whining that the Nazis are really mean and they're doing bad things. Like, unfortunately, a lot of conservative pundits today love to, whine and moan about the left ruining the country. But what are we doing about it? Right. And so she demands to join the White Rose Resistance. Come to find out, it had been co-founded and was being run by none other than her older brother, Hans Scholl. So to give an expedited version of the story, Olivia, for the sake of time, she demands to join the White Rose Resistance, becomes the youngest and only female of the White Rose Resistance in the Munich chapter. Their bravery, of course, spawned other chapters across Germany. For the rest of 1942, they stay up all night, write, print, and distribute these leaflets, and it drove the Nazis insane, right? You understand, 1942, any political dissidents are murdered by the state. And they were very clear that they were Christians, and they were asking the good people to wake up. They said things like, if you know, why do you not act? Or they would say, we are the White Rose Resistance. We are your bad conscience, and we will not leave you alone. And so in 1943, they took things to the next level. And on February 18th, 1943, Hans and Sophie, brother and sister, walked onto the campus at the University of Munich when the halls were quiet, when class was in session. And they began to drop off piles of these illegal leaflets all around the university. Now, you understand, just like the church, the halls of the academy, right, and the colleges had also largely been co-opted into obedience by the Third Reich. And so this was very dangerous. And in this iconic scene, Sophie walks to the third floor balcony of the university, and she throws an entire stack of leaflets down to the atrium below. Now, when you throw paper, it goes everywhere, right? The janitor catches her in the act. He was a committed Nazi. He calls the Gestapo, has him arrested on the spot. For the next 4 days, they're brutally interrogated, physically assaulted, and they refuse to implicate any of their other friends and members of the White Rose Resistance. Because they were arrested on February 18th, 1943, guys, they missed a meeting that they had scheduled that afternoon with a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who had been so inspired by the courage of these young 20-something resistance fighters that he wanted to connect with them. They never made that meeting. So for the next 4 days, they would be in a prison cell and interrogated by the Nazis. And Sophie would speak with a level of spiritual, moral, and clarity and courage lost on most of the German pulpits. And this was a short quote that she said, according to her cellmate, right before the Nazis came and took her to the guillotine. And she looked out her window, Olivia, and she said, how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause? Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go now. But what does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action. They believe that their sacrifice, Olivia, would plant the seeds of resistance in the hearts of millions of good Germans who knew better to do something to rise up and bring a grinding halt to the Nazi regime. If you guys want to join the White Rose Resistance, go to thewhiterose.life, check out our Instagram or my podcast as well, and welcome to the resistance. It's time to take back the country and take back life and liberty before it's too late.
That is absolutely true. Thank you so much, Seth, for joining us today.
Thank you for your time.
And I just wanted to say, exactly in the same lines of this is why the Western Journal speaks truth and has podcasts like this and has newsletters like this. We want to have conservative and Christian voices on, just like Seth, and make sure that we are fighting the good fight. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is WJ Now and Olivia Brown.